So yes, I went out to see the Markiplier movie, Iron Lung. Going out on a blistering, rainy British night, going over to one of the earliest screenings I could find in the country. Hey, it's nice it's even out internationally. Because what do you know, it is a damn successful YouTuber movie. Kind of. Obviously not. It is way more than that. And it actually leaps and bounds beyond the usual fest of old school YouTuber movies, which in their own way are a beautiful pocket of nostalgia and fun. But we're long gone from the likes of Fred the Movie or the Smosh Movie or the Angry Video Game Nerd, because this isn't just a movie about Markiplier. There's plenty of those already with Markiplier in the name. No, this is just outright a movie made by a YouTuber, and it is proper, full-on, artsy, indie, and brilliant. Having an actual muse to bounce off of and adapting a video game opens up for way more cinematic art to be shown off, and clearly there is plenty to see. Now, Iron Lung the game is already an established, massively popular indie game, all about controlling a submarine inside of an ocean full of blood. A crazy great premise to go off alone, and for a muse for a film, makes a lot of sense on the indie front, as you only really get one singular room to bounce off of, and making a film that is in one room is a great limitation to allow, for one, your budget to be pretty fine with it, but also you can just do so much great artsy stuff. And in a lot of ways, this does feel like a great short film that just keeps going. It's a film. And I guess the second time a billionaire goes to the bottom of the ocean in a submarine. But not only is this a movie created by a YouTuber, it is directed, edited, and has the starring role of Markiplier up front and center. And that is an interesting double-edged sword to try to handle, because the big question probably on everyone's mind, wanting to take on this movie as a movie, and not just the Markiplier project, is, does Markiplier dissolve into his character, or is this just Mark in a sub? And in my personal opinion, I found that, especially in the early minutes, this felt like Markiplier was in the submarine, but over time, he did eventually manage to dissolve into the character. It's kind of like just in general, you get used to the vibes of a new thing over time. Once the novelty of this movie faded away and you get it, you're in it, so too does the character of Simon come out. Doesn't help that we don't actually hear about his name for like the first half of the movie. So it is just a guy, he's convict. It's Markiplier. You know, it has to be. I don't have another name for him. But also, it works great narratively. They do some good things with it, so it makes sense. Overall, I don't think at all it was actually a hurdle that I was worried it could end up to be. The first obvious red flag this movie you would expect to have off rip, it doesn't actually have. And that's a fantastic hurdle to get over at the start. And in case you're worried about spoilers, we're not going to divulge into them straight away. They'll be pushed right back to the end of the video, and I'll give you a warning. But at least going on the spoiler-free discussions of this review, let's roll into that now. Can you tell I recorded this later in the recording time? The other obvious red flag you would think to come up to is the fact that this is a video game adaptation. And though we've had some great ones in the most recent years, there are a lot of crappy adaptations as well, and Iron Lung, I think, has been fantastically adapted into this new medium and just works brilliantly well as a narrative muse anyway. The physical effects of the actual set are brilliant. The whole thing is on a giant movable rig, which is just stellar. And the actual development of the plot is so very one-to-one with the games that it's just great fan service out of what is essentially just a tiny room the whole time. Not to mention there are some extra details that they did add for the movie that I think are brilliant additions along the way, or maybe they were in the lore. I don't fully know the lore of the games. I went into this movie having only seen Markiplier's first Let's Play of the first Iron Lung video he made, which is very much point A to point Z, here's all the coordinates, here's the thing at the end. So there were extra elements introduced into the wider world of this movie that I didn't get, and only after the film finished did I go into his lore update video, and then his cheating video, and then him talking about the movie afterwards in general. Very disappointing there wasn't a Markiplier mode in the movie, but I guess that's technically the whole thing anyway. But elements I didn't immediately get from any of the lore descriptions I personally heard myself was the idea that the photographs that are made from pressing a button at the back of the sub is actually a giant X-ray photograph, and the way they use that into the narrative of the movie I think is a really succinct way of building a conflict, a little bit of drama, and essentially made me say at about a tenth of the way way in the movie, man, he's really sealed his fate now, you know? And ironically, there are even some new additions that were accidentally new additions, like the inclusion of an intercom speaker in the sub. Turns out that's not even in the game. Markiplier just thought that it was and added it in. Very much carrying a lot of the dialogue in this movie. It's everybody else that isn't Mark. What's also really nice with the mysterious eldritch horror kind of universe that Iron Lung is set in is that this movie allows itself to lean a little bit more on theories because you can extrapolate a lot of things out of it. I think there is a little bit of take your own perception of what's going on in some elements. Like, one of the mechanics of the sub is that there's obviously a limited amount of oxygen, and once we get to, what a surprise, low oxygen as the movie progresses, you could infer that things get more abstract as Simon is beginning to hallucinate from oxygen deprivation. Or, you know, just drama happens later on, that too, whatever you want. All the while, one of the other things I personally was a little bit nervous about is I'm not actually great with horror. I hate jump scares. I'm not good at being scared. And thankfully, this isn't really a scary movie. It's not nearly as scary as I thought it was. It essentially has no jump scares. It's not a jump scare movie, you know? It's all tension, suspense, atmosphere, and a little bit of psychological thriller. So if you're worried about a horror movie, this isn't that. There's some gross imagery in places, you know, and if you have a deep fear of drowning, you're probably not going to like a movie about a submarine. But I definitely think that did do this movie a good service, because it didn't feel cheap as a horror film. It felt like a very enriching cinematic experience, which is exactly what I like to see. And I think in a lot of ways, it's also a very rewatchable movie in order to pick up some of the extra details that are a little bit more hidden in the background. I think intentionally, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. Now, in the early parts of the movie, it is a little bit of a slow burn, but I personally don't think I had any real issues with the pacing. When I watch movies, I'm usually pretty hooked anyway, and I don't really think retention-wise I was ever really getting bored. We montage at the perfect times when we want to skip through something a little bit tedious, and I think the only thing that really surprised me is that we didn't learn some of the mechanics of the submarine, the actual gameplay elements that have been adapted, until quite a bit later than I expected. Mainly the obstacle beepers around the sub. Like, it showed it going on for a little bit, but it took a while for them to explain what the beeping meant. But then when they did, great. Better than the games, because it can do more things. And while I think the pacing was great for retention all the way through, I kind of wish the ending was slightly slower, but we'll talk more about spoiler ending things when we get there. The only other real problem I have is about some of that real background fodder, as the use of the intercom being used for all other voices means that there's often a filter on it that I didn't fully pass all the words of. And I think sometimes that is intentional. There are some beats that are literally overlapped on top of each other, so you don't get all the details. You know what's going on in the current submarine, that's all you really need to know. But as someone that likes to pick up every single detail, I didn't. And that could also be down to the mixing quality of the different cinemas we each go to. But I think another element as well is the fact that this is a very tell, don't show movie, because it can't show all too much. There are brief flashbacks in certain segments, and they always leave you wanting more, again leaning on the theorize all the rest of the details. Whilst at the same time, there are some major plot beats towards the end I literally just didn't notice. I also had a very long day, and I was tired at the 10 o'clock screening for this thing, so maybe I was just silly. And I definitely need to rewatch this movie again to probably pick up most of the extra details, and I will, because it's worth it. But I do think some elements were unfortunately lost, perhaps from some of the choices in how to present some of this story, but also great it wasn't all exposition too. Visually, this thing is absolutely chock full with brilliant visual effects and physical. With it not being a mainstream studio movie, you can see the limitations this movie had, and they absolutely managed to flourish within it. And it's especially nice when you go through the credits to see all the people involved, both you might recognize and some you don't, and even seeing things like it was actually edited predominantly by Markiplier himself, which you could also kind of see if you're as chronically online watching YouTube videos as I am, where we've been seeing him for the past few years now, popping up in the background of things while working on this project, clearly trying to trailblaze his own skill build-up to make this project possible. And in a lot of ways, that makes this movie so much more endearing, as you can just see the passion seething off of it. And I think as well, with Markiplier's actual acting ability, I think he does a fantastic job as Simon, who himself is a bit of an interesting character. This is a very tragic but also violent character naturally. He's obviously got some unfair circumstances, and he does claim himself to be innocent, but he also violently lashes out multiple times in his frustrations. And the way he seems to handle his emotions is a lot of angry and sadness, and kind of not more. I, at one point, kind of expected him to almost laugh a little bit towards the end as he got more mad. But maybe that would make him seem more like Markiplier if he started laughing again. I think the only times that Markiplier sort of seemed to peel out of the Simon role is when he was either shouting a bunch of expletives back to back to back, because that's a common Markiplier quote itself. But also at one point, Simon randomly has his hair now done up in a bun halfway through. Felt like, oh, well, it's a whole new filming day for sure now. He's managed to brush his hair in the middle, and that felt suddenly like it pulled me out, and I'm like, oh, it's Markiplier when he has his hair up. But when it comes to the actual emotional moments, you can really feel his sadness and anger when he's having those emotions, and I think the arguments as well work really well, especially towards the end when he's getting the final words out. And only really a couple of lines are a little bit spotty in places, but like 95% of his dialogue is just brilliantly Simon, and I think he does a really good job. Now, considering there aren't exactly a lot of comparison points for this movie other than the personally funded Megalopolis flop or much less cinematic past YouTuber movies, it's very clear that Iron Lung is in a whole world of its own, and a real marker of what passionate, human-made work can turn around to be, especially during this current rise of generative AI cinema. Not to mention mainline studios cutting corners, relying entirely on sequels or removing any leaps of faith on a chance script by a new person. It's really great to see someone blazing their own path from otherwise underdog odds. What with studios never really seeming to have faith in this transition from free YouTube movement to the big real industry. And will a movie like this cause some change in the future? Probably not, let's be honest. I personally don't have very high hopes. I mean, I personally cover AI animation disappointments every week, and it's only getting more now, let alone the years ago when this project started. But you can always count on some super passionate human to do most of the legwork themselves and really surprise us and the industry as they themselves are turning their backs to us. Or at the very least, Markiplier will just do it again. That you can probably count on too. Also, on just a bit of a personal note here, back in 2022, I actually attended VidCon and managed to meet the mythical Markiplier himself. He's naturally the kind of person that typically doesn't appear too often. I just happened to go to a panel that happened to have him guest appear in, and then he left immediately afterwards. But I did get to have a conversation with him right after he'd completed In Space with Markiplier 2. And I remember introducing myself, being like, oh, I've just hit 500,000 subscribers, and I'd love to hear any advice you have for how you make a project like this really pick up. And he basically turned around to me and said that if you've got any big creative project idea in mind, you've just got to dive in and go for it. Very much running passion forwards first. And I guess in a sense, really trying to keep artistic integrity in mind. We are all art driven, and we should find that thing that really has a passionate thing for us. It's the kind of words I definitely took to heart and was one of the highlights of my American visit back then. But you can tell it's absolutely the ethos that Markiplier has been going forwards with in recent years, especially with this project in mind. And I'm also actually creating something on the side secretly that I'm working on. But it is just a very nice memory, and something I thought I'd bring up because it's very emblematic of just where Markiplier's stance is on what he's working on and what he'd like each of us to also do. Also, hope it's not a dick move to showcase that photo, since Markiplier's clearly just got a coffee, you know, so it's normal, it's casual. Hope that's okay. But okay, from now we're gonna go into proper spoiler territory, and technically it comes with a couple more critiques as well. So if you haven't seen the movie yet, I think you absolutely should. It's great to support a passionate project like this anyway, and I think this is a project absolutely worth the money. But otherwise, do stick around and we'll get into the real meat of this movie, as we talk more about the ending half. So, this is an incredibly great indie-made production, but it isn't quite without its flaws. This is obviously not going to be the best movie in the world, and I did come into it with a very open mind of, it can have its blips and blaps everywhere. It's clearly a passion project, and definitely just feels like, someone you know is doing a great thing, let's support and see how it does. And I think in pretty much every regard, you can comfortably watch this movie, have a great time, know what's going on, and say you had a great cinema experience. It's only when really digging down to some of the small details that I found I particularly missed stuff, or was frustrated by a little bit of the lack of explanation, more than just, it's theory bait. As I said earlier, there is a lot of tell, don't show in this movie. None of the other characters in this movie physically do much because they are mostly just voice acting in on an intercom. If not just a vague memory blur against a bunch of different voices at once. Add on to the fact that they have filters and voice pitches and dreamy elements added to them, and it can be at times similarly disorientating, and I unfortunately missed a pretty major beat towards the end too, that only when it was explained afterwards did I feel like an idiot that I didn't notice it. And that could be me, but I will mention it anyway. Hey there! Thank you for making it to the halfway mark of this video. Come subscribe if you haven't already for more new movie reviews. We typically do 3D animation over on this channel, but I'll happily talk about more YouTube-y side of things in future. We also typically cover AI animation news and criticize how bad it typically is. So in a lot of ways, this is very much the total opposite of that prompt, an actual passionate human-made project. Fantastic. Not to mention created by someone I genuinely look up to in a lot of ways, and would like to myself take on some sort of passionate project like this in future. I'll let you know if I ever get around to announcing something like that. But otherwise, do join along if you want to hear all other things movie related. We've done YouTuber movies in the past, more so in a jokier, critiquing kind of way before, but not insultingly. Or hey, we've done video game adaptations as well. Also something that historically flops on the channel. But hey, this is a passion project of a video anyway, so it's fitting to cover the passionate movie that this one is. Anyway, enough rambling from me. I'll let you get back to the second half of this video now. So, as Simon goes deeper down into his little depth missions, some weird things begin to happen. And one of the early ones that's an interesting little side thing is, a guy appears in the submarine. A big, gory, bloodly guy wanders past and disappears. And this is just an unexplained apparition. The kind of thing I think you're allowed to guess about. Was Simon imagining it? Is it just an element of eldritch horror that whatever's here fully has control of the sub and can be inside if it wants to be? Do you infer that it actually was Simon himself since he appears twice? Once from the back of the sub while Simon's in the chair, and then again when Simon's at the back of the sub and he's in the chair? It's unexplained and it's fun. Creepy, keeps the tension high, you think it'll appear at any minute, and it certainly made me prepare for a jump scare the whole time. Great for that tension building. Furthermore, what we learn as one of the general premises for this story taking place is the fact that Simon is in fact a convict and that he's done something bad in the past, which we come to learn is he is part of the destruction of Filament Station, another space station out in the wider universe that got destroyed after some sort of attack. And as Simon starts to expel a little bit more that his brothers were attacking the place, but then also that actually he was the only one trying to stop it, but he's the one being convicted, you do also get a brief flashback of his brothers, I guess, calling him out, and then also dying in the explosion that destroys Filament Station. But it is a little bit vague, and I think it's fine enough in this case. You get the idea, but it was a little bit hard to follow fully the backstory of Simon there, especially as we get more memories of what's going on. Simon's trying to say he is fully innocent and that he was trying to stop, I guess, the reactor exploding. By the way, the fact that it even was a reactor explosion, I only learned after seeing the lore video afterwards in a block of text. That's fine. But then there are other elements where you hear his fellow brothers calling him in a memory Simon the Butcher, implying he has already killed people in the past, and maybe adds a little bit of moral grayness to him that maybe he is a bad person, he did kill people, but he also tried to stop the big bad at the end, the explosion of Filament Station. Maybe that kind of thing is, again, more theory bait, and in that sense it's kind of good, but it is more of the scale of I didn't fully get all the pieces, and that's a shame. It's an excuse for me to rewatch it is what it is. But then, as we go even further down into the mission, Simon comes across the SM-8, an alternative submarine that has similarly exploded and has a whole bunch of mysteries around it. I think this element of the game is a great exploration. Also, I didn't mention this earlier, but I love how Simon builds part of the map further, and it's now on 3 separate pages rather than just the big page of the game. Great adaptation, love that kind of stuff. But from here as well, we start to hear alternative voices that I think have several different points and plots that they float around with that it gets a little confusing. On the one hand, there is a voice that Simon is seemingly imagining that he's talking to during a bad state of his mission, and I think that's really nice and cool. I think you can foreshadow that it is a fake voice because the light is not on the intercom, and that's really nice. Whilst also, I think it does say a real coordinate, which is actually correct, which, ooh, scary. But also, when it comes to the actual beats of the history of the SM-8, I didn't fully get all of it all of the time. For one, I didn't even realize that it was actually a official scientist submarine built for surveying and not intended to have actually killed the person inside. Like the iron lung is more like a prison cell. If you die, you die. It doesn't matter because you're a convict in there. That was again something I only learned from a paragraph from a lore video later. Maybe you don't need it in the movie and that's fine. But also you get a voice clip from the scientist of the past, and it's one of those, I couldn't fully tell what they were saying. It all gets a little bit garbled. There's a background line of someone saying, hey, I told you not to drink that stuff, which I guess insinuates they were drinking the blood, and also they're making food out of the blood. Cool. Expanded universe stuff there, I guess. And then there's also an element of them talking about an enlightened light they have found down here that's possibly an element that caused the quiet rapture, which is another thing in universe that destroyed a bunch of planets and stars suddenly. They just vanished. And it's a lot of beats that are kind of around that you don't fully get. Maybe that's the point. But later on, that voice comes back again when you realize now that this voice is from someone who's already dead and gone, because the monster, the eldritch horror, is repeating this voice. And it took me forever to realize why suddenly, when the monster's using the voice, they had a different opinion to the scientist. Because it's the same voice at one point saying, the light is everything we need, this is the answer, and get rid of evidence of the voice. All the while interlaid with the sound of the captain leader that Simon's trying to listen to, Simon, and any male subordinates that are all around. And they're all coming out of the intercom all at once, that it was just a jarbled mess that I wasn't able to follow. I think I get it now, having really dissected what I thought I was hearing, but it was a lot. It was a movie you really have to pay attention to, and even then you still don't fully get everything explained, and I missed beats at all. In fact, here's the major beat I really didn't notice at the end, which is honestly a little bit blasphemous. So as Simon's now trying to do the final extraction, he's gone back to the wreckage, he's gathered the black box information, downloaded it on his computer, and is trying to return to get picked up again. I didn't realize that the captain leader that he's been following the orders from has herself gotten into a sub and come down to the ocean to meet him, to take him out. I didn't realize she got into the ocean at all because we don't see any of it. It's audio only, and I assumed she was still waiting for him up on the surface because it sounds the same wherever she is. And then part of the final beats of the movie is the fact that the big eldritch monster horror thing does in fact consume and kill the captain in the other submarine. I didn't notice that. I just thought there was a photo of the monster at the end and there was a submarine in their mouth. Oh, it must be the SM-8 because that's the only submarine I've seen so far. Really stupid. It could just be me being tired, but a major character death I just didn't notice because this movie is so tell don't show. It's so audio only in a lot of places, a bit of a radio play I guess, and it's a lot of filters and overlappings and blurriness, which is a real shame because I didn't feel the impact of that. I just thought with all the voices talking at once and then one went silent, the monster was talking in his head more. And in fact, a lot of times there were beats happening that I could see what was happening but didn't fully understand why exactly. There's a part where Simon goes under the grated hallways of the sub. I didn't know why he was doing that until finally at the end I saw he was restarting the engine. I don't know if a word was ever said, so it was dialogueless, but I just thought he was, I don't know, wandering in the dark for some reason. And then he does it a second time with blood filling in the sub. Also though, love that the blood actually filled in with the sub. I was hoping they were going to do that eventually, and they do. Doesn't come from a leak or anything, it just appears, but so it does in the game as well, so that's fine. And then I was wondering why he's even taking out this black box of the sub anyway, when surely it would still be grabbable wherever the sub ends up, but I guess it was more like either a hard drive that has now the files of the past sub, or it is now a black box that he then plans to put on a life jacket and send up the top. I got that, just didn't know why he needed to do that fully. I think it was fine though. Definitely one of the spoilery highlights as well is the big slow-mo flash oxygen-deprived sleep sequence that Simon has, whereby the ship cracks in the middle and then blasts through blood right through the center, and you see the giant fish monster as well in the sub, only to teleport Simon up to the surface to see the whole thing drowned in blood. Brilliant, brilliant spectacle. Kind of a shame Stranger Things got there first and has kind of copyrighted Big Red Skies. I just saw Stranger Things finales in that. But I do love the slow-mo flash moment where I genuinely thought the sub had just been exposed and he was dead. Really nice development, worked really nicely. Blame it on the oxygen deprivation. I'll personally love that. But anyway, as the movie is now coming to an end, everything's going awful, characters are dying, and it goes over my head somehow. Simon finally decides to ram the monster itself, and also finally sacrifice his life after trying to just survive by any means necessary this whole time. He's got the black box or the hard drive or the whatever in a life jacket, wrapped it all up to go to the surface so his sacrifice is not in vain, and the files of whatever the history is that I hardly could pass will go on to the future. It's all bigger than him anyway. The monster is chasing them all at the same time, and then, somehow, the monster explodes. The submarine explodes in its mouth. Again, this is probably another detail that is explained if I just watched it again, but I really don't see how or why this time. By no means do I remember there being an establishment of dynamite or oxygen tanks that would explode when bitten, full Jaws style or anything. I guess the SM-8 had a big explosion from its hull, so maybe all the submarines just do that. But surely it would have happened last time it was eaten by the monster in some degree. But in a lot of ways, I don't know why the monster died. It was a surprisingly happy ending in that front, but I also do like that it was a bad ending for Simon. He doesn't survive the end of the story. It's a very British ending. Just red ocean and the last hope for humanity just bubbling on top. It's one of the real missing pieces that I couldn't explain afterwards. Why did it explode? Because bad guy. And that's a shame, but I will be rewatching this movie, and then I'll find out I'm just a dumbass the whole time. And that's great too. But in every other aspect, you don't need to know these minor details to know what the plot is, and you don't need to know all the background fodder. I just like knowing every single detail. Who was drinking the blood and why? You simply get to see the stakes are getting bad, he's being chased, blood's building everywhere, the blood is now congealing into a kind of fleshy form of life itself, building onto Simon's skin. Even when he touches pipes, he's now immediately stuck to it. That was a bit of a leap, one of the ones I thought went a bit too quickly. Similarly, on a personal note, I came to learn I'm absolutely immune to skin horror, which is lovely. A lot of Simon's wounds that he builds over the time of this mission starts getting corrupted and more bloodily, I guess. I had no problems watching that stuff. That's just an average Tuesday for me. I've had eczema scabs worse than that before. Whilst also you can add the theory that that's how Simon was able to live multiple days without any oxygen, is because the blood ocean is red. It is itself oxygenated and has iron in it. So chances are his wounds were getting blood inside of them. It kept dripping on his hands and arms anyway. That would be what was feeding him oxygen. That's a really cool development. I also thought it was really cool as a development that his whole arm got corrupted with this blood thing and then fully came off. I'm only disappointed we didn't get more one-armed Simon stuff. I think it would have been really cool to see him do more things, completely deteriorating at the end, really embellishing it. But really, the moment he loses an arm is the moment he sits down and takes it and sacrifices himself. Also great too, a beautiful deterioration of a man. So artsy, so cool in the mechanics, and way beyond what the video game was able to do on its small budget. So really nice to see more from this universe in that regard. It's just the little details I missed in a bunch of places. One big one because I'm a dumbass, but still leaps and bounds beyond what is the usual standard fare for comparisons, and absolutely cinematic art throughout. Who knows what all that business is with the enlightening light they found down there that's the answer to everything, and now there's evidence of whatever that is on the files that's perhaps the hope of humanity. I assume that's where the storyline would continue going, if there's any more plot to actually be seen of Iron Lung beyond hope. And that's it. But overall, with all of my little nitpicky problems and apparently struggling with my own media literacy when it's 10 o'clock at night, what a shame. This was an incredible cinematic experience, and I think it could even be told by the fact that I came to this screening in the middle of a Brighton Cineworld at the only time it was showing, with 2 screenings of Iron Lung at the same time, a packed out room of Markiplier fans. And it wasn't a Marvel movie reaction. It wasn't a, wow, Markiplier's on screen kind of vibe. It wasn't at all any of that. It was silent. It was tense. It was everyone genuinely taking this on, not as the Markiplier movie, but as just genuine, solid cinema. People were taking it super seriously. because this movie wanted you to take it seriously. Mark is playing it super straight and serious. The atmosphere is on point, and I think it does a fantastic job of getting over its own random red flag. This could have easily been the Mimi movie. Wow, look, Mark's being so serious. I know him anyway. It wasn't, and I think the fact that it managed to genuinely captivate its incredibly passionate and easily vocal audience just shows how much artistic integrity it had, because it made people really sit down and just take it in. And I think that really does just go to show how solid of a movie this turned out to be. Of course, if Markiplier chooses to take something a bit more lighthearted again next time, like Markiplier in space with comedy bits around the sides, I wouldn't blame him. I wouldn't be surprised if we go for something more light next time. I'd be happy with any and either, as long as there could be more, in a way that's not totally overworking himself too. Yeah, we'll see. The loudest the crowd ever really got was R-ing or making noise at people they recognized in the credits, Chica, Lixian, Sean McLaughlin, and an applause once the credits finally rolled. And hey, that's probably the best you could ever ask for, so well done, Mark. For now, though, I'd best finally end it off there. I've not got nearly enough footage to show in the background of this video for a half-hour-long review, so my apologies for the repeating footage. But for now, my name's been Daz. Thank you very much for reaching the end of this video. Do let us know your thoughts on Iron Lung. Have you seen it? What do you think? Where does it go from here? Tell me some theories and lore stuff, or explain the stupid stuff that somehow went over my head. I'd love to hear all of your thoughts and more. This is a really interesting premise of a movie. We don't get movies like these very often, and we probably won't for another 3 or 4 years. I don't even know if this video is going to do very well, to be honest. It's live action, but what can you do? Do let us know down in the description below. But otherwise, I shall finally see you all in a little bit. Cheerio!